1 Samuel. So if you want to follow along with in your Bibles, it'll be 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. That's 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had two wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had no children, but Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, "Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and he said to her, "How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine." "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my heart, out of my great anguish and grief." Eli answered, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant what you have asked of him." She said, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Early the next morning they arose and worshipped before the Lord, then went back to their home in Ramah. Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him."
Amen. Thanks, Lee. Today we begin a new series, our fall sermon series, going through the book of 1 Samuel. Really, we'll only get through the life of Samuel, and then next year we'll have to wait to pick up with the life of Saul, and then the year after that with the life of David in the fall. Sorry, I'm a scheduler, I'm a planner. But here we come to catch up with the nation of Israel. Where have they been? Where are we meeting them? We actually meet them in a very similar place in this individual woman, Hannah. I read this book yesterday, Dr. Seuss's book, All the Places You'll Go. One of the books I've probably read more than any other book in the world. It's a great story to read to young children like my children, and it's also a great gift to give to graduating seniors who are off to great places, right? But not perhaps for the reasons that you think it's a great book. The title is optimistic, yes, as if all the places that you're going to go in life and all the things you will do and try will be just wonderful. He does start out the book very optimistic. And he does give the reader great promise and hope. But the reason why it's such a great story, why it'd be such a good gift to give, is because it's real. And he doesn't even actually promise you success. He only says it's 98.75% guaranteed. He writes, wherever you fly, you'll be the best of the best. Wherever you go, you will top all the rest, except when you don't. Because sometimes you won't. And for the next few pages, Dr. Seuss talks about bang-ups and hang-ups, and lurches and slumps, and unmarked streets that leave you with doubts. Now, all of you here either have dreams for yourself, or you had dreams for yourself. For those of you who've had dreams of yourself, whether they're big dreams or small dreams, to make the team, to make it big, to meet a friend, to find true love, well, now you're here. And is it all that you thought? Are you wondering what kind of hope there may be to turn the tide for this place you're in, or some hope to surprise you with some great meaning and purpose that you didn't realize was there all along? The nation of Israel finds itself in this place as we come to the book of 1 Samuel. It's also where a barren Israelite wife named Hannah finds herself as we meet her in chapter 1. The nation of Israel, if you remember, began with the grandest promises and hope. The Lord appeared to Abraham, the founding father of their nation, and spoke this prophetic word of promise to him. Genesis chapter 17. I will make you fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants, and I will be their God. Wow, great promise, just like Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go. Now, in the books of Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy that come after Genesis, we read of their journey, of Abraham's descendants and their journey to Egypt. Into Egypt, their deliverance out of Egypt, their pathway toward this promised land where their hopes and dreams were supposed to come true. The book of Joshua recounts when they first entered the land, how the Lord told them to get settled in, the struggles that surrounded them, both in the nations that resided there, that were already there, as well as the fears and doubts that were inside of them. The book of Judges, just before 1 Samuel, recounts their steady and spiraling decline as a nation, being ravaged by the neighbors they were supposed to drive out, with no single leader to unite them as one nation. They're caught in an endless cycle of highs and lows until they just get lower and lower and lower until they are most desperate for help. Their nation pulls apart more and more, and it seems as if every single family unit is fending for themselves, doing whatever seems right to them. Indeed, this is the description repeated throughout the book of Judges, the very last line of that book even, before we turn in anticipation to 1 Samuel. In those days there was no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Where is this great hope and promise spoken to Abraham? Has it already come and gone, they must have wondered, and we just missed it? Was it all a dream to begin with? As we enter chapter 1 of 1 Samuel, we find that Hannah, this young Israelite woman, is in the same place. She embodies this same story. She's married to Elkanah, who, from the accounts of chapters 1 and 2, is a well-off man. Any woman would have been happy to be married to Elkanah. He's also a faithful husband and father. He's faithful to lead his family every single year in worship. But Hannah is barren, and that's a big deal in the ancient Near East. One commentator writes that barrenness in the ancient times was the ultimate tragedy for a married woman, since her husband's hopes and dreams depended on her providing him with a son to perpetuate his name and inherit the estate. This is how wealth was passed on from generation to generation. There were many other reasons why barrenness was a tragedy, by the way, a lot of economic reasons. But in our culture and economy today, we don't feel the same weight that barrenness would bring to a woman in the ancient Near East. Now, women today, though, still will share that same personal, social pain, but not the economic pain in the same way. So imagine you're a woman who can't have children. It's hard enough to get that news. But now add to that the condition, which will not allow you to work either. And you happen to be in a place, mind you, that has no disability coverage to support you. Okay, so this might get us just a little bit closer to the depths of the barrenness of a woman in the ancient Near East. And this is probably why Elkanah had 2 wives. At first, he married Hannah, the love of his life, he says. You're the favored one. But she was barren. So economically, how are we going to perpetuate our estate and continue the family line? How are we going to even survive without raising children who can help around the house, help around the property? So as was custom in that time, a second wife would be taken to bear children and perpetuate the name and the estate of the household. Israel needed a king. Hannah needed a son. What do you think is your greatest need this morning? What would be that thing that if you had it, you would be able to just find relief, be at peace, relax? What is that one thing that would make everything else seem right with the world? So many things might come to mind, and I don't want to get too specific because then I'll spoil it, and you could have been thinking of something for you. But here's some ideas. Generally, financial stability, happy marriage if you're married, good health, lasting friendship, a greater purpose and meaning to life. And you see everybody else seeming to have one. It feels like you're missing out. If you're older, and I'll probably experience this myself as I get older, my greatest need, right, is to simply know that my children are successful and walk with the Lord. What is that greatest need of your life right now? I have to ask this of myself as a pastor on behalf of the church. What's the greatest need that we have as a church? Oh, if we just had that. If we just had someone else to lead music, right? If we just had somebody else to lead a student ministry. If we just had somebody else to lead serving opportunities in our community. What do we think we need as a church? You getting discouraged because we feel at lack? Israel thought they needed a king to fight their battles like all the other nations around them. Hannah thought she needed a son, and both are almost right. They're almost right, but not quite. Though, as we will find out, God will be pleased to provide for them in ways they never imagined, and in ways that exceed the blessing that they were even after to begin with. We see this main idea come together with these needs. That because the Lord Almighty, which is the specific name we find of the Lord in this passage, because the Lord Almighty remembers the lowly, we can make our appeals to him and go in peace, even before we receive the thing that we're after. This is what we find in 1 Samuel chapter 1. Because the Lord Almighty remembers the lowly, we can make our appeals to him and go in peace. Now, the people in our life don't necessarily help us in this pursuit. Sometimes they make it incredibly difficult to stay on the right path, to pursue God the way we should, to see things from his perspective rather than our own. But consider Hannah's relationship with her husband, again, Elkanah. Her very name means favored one, and she was favored by Elkanah over Peninnah. She received a double portion of the annual sacrifice, which, by the way, when they would go to sacrifice, it was like a barbecue festival. They were eating most of the food they were bringing. Did you know that? She received a double portion from Elkanah, as we read. And yet, we find how emotionally incompetent Elkanah is. What he was thinking was going to be a great comfort to his favored wife. The fact is she had no children to share this food with, unlike Peninnah, this annual sacrifice meal. And so she is just crushed all the more with a reminder of her isolation. So much so she can't even eat any of it herself, it says. She refused to eat. To add to his emotional incompetence, like us well-meaning husbands, why are you so sad, he says. Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Geez, Louise, man. Almost like a teenage girl who expects to be invited out by other girls only to be passed over and forgotten. What does this girl do? She cries out to her parents, nobody likes me. And what do we dummies say to her? I like you. Well, that doesn't help me, Mom. That doesn't help me in this situation. I appreciate that you like me. Doesn't help me in this situation. Now consider Hannah's relationship with Peninnah. Peninnah wedges the knife of Hannah's despair deeper into her heart. Every year as they attend this annual sacrifice, making fun of her with just an evil cruelty, like the ugly stepsisters of every Disney movie, just cruel. And then there's Eli, the priest, the man of God, the one who, if anyone, could have lifted her up with courage. It was him, but he's so out of touch with real life and the struggles of common people. He cannot even recognize when a woman is in despair and calling out to God in prayer. People like Eli speak so matter-of-factly to us, it makes us feel like we're the crazy ones. We all know and experience having people around us who are insensitive, others who are harsh and cruel with their insults, and others who are simply out of touch. And in light of all these factors, it makes carrying our burdens even more difficult. And so we're incredibly prone in this moment to compromise. That is, to take matters into our own hands. To say, all right, I'll try to satisfy my need myself in my strength, in my own way. And this is what's at stake for us if we don't get this. If we compromise, we give in to pressure that's mounting against us by trying to satisfy our own needs with our own strength in our own way, that is, apart from God's power, apart from God's plan. We'll never be able to experience the kind of peace we're searching for. In every case in the Bible that we find a barren woman, it's almost every case that what do we find the husband and wife doing? Compromising, seeking out their own plan, their own way to solve this problem of barrenness. You can think of Abraham, Isaac, all of these great men and women of faith, right? Well, Hannah's the only one who actually does the right thing and doesn't take matters into her own hands, but pours her heart out to God. And when we find people taking matters into their own hands rather than waiting on God or relying on his plan, how much despair and confusion and conflict results from their decisions? Despite all the pressure to compromise, Hannah poured herself out before the Lord. And when Eli, the priest, realizes what's actually happening before him, he tells her, "Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant what you've asked of him." And this is what we're after too. Peace. Shalom. Wholeness. That sigh of relief of having received that one thing we think would make everything else seem right with our world. But right here is a detail I hope you didn't miss as Lee was reading the passage. Did you notice when Eli says to her, "Go in peace," and she goes in peace, she feels better. She begins to eat again. She goes back and has the meal, catches up. She hadn't even received what she was after. It's not like Eli said, "Hey, I have news for you. You're pregnant." She still hadn't even been with her husband. She was not pregnant. She didn't receive anything that she was after, and yet she was able to go in peace anyways. How does that work? Why would simply knowing that basically, "Oh, the Lord sees you, may you go in peace," why would that change her countenance, her despairing demeanor, even though nothing had actually changed in her life substantively? Well, it would just depend on who that person is, who notices you. It would just depend what they could do. Most of the time when people see you in your misery, it's embarrassing. But sometimes there's particular people who see you in your misery, and it's a great relief, isn't it? You're broken down on the side of the road, everybody's passing you by, and then a familiar car rolls up, and your friend pops out and says, "I thought I recognized that car." What a relief that they saw you. But how embarrassing it was when everyone else was looking. When most people see you, it's embarrassing, but there's that one person who catches your eye, and it completely brings relief, even though substantively nothing has actually changed yet. So then, who is this God who noticed Hannah? Who is he? Whereby she could be totally changed, and in a way even healed of this heartbreaking situation, which he still endures. He is, according to 1 Samuel chapter 1, the Lord Almighty. Although this title will be used hundreds of times for God in the Bible, this is the first time we would find it in the Bible. It means Lord over all things. Other times it's translated Lord of hosts or Lord of armies, as if he were a great king over host and host of angelic soldiers. armies upon armies at his command. The Lord has actually already demonstrated this power, this almighty power, to the Israelites, delivering them from Egypt in the hand of the mighty Pharaoh, through the 10 plagues, which are a clear sign of him making war on the very idea of Egyptian gods, which might be defending the Egyptians. And also, the Lord showed his power through this great deliverance, through the Red Sea, displaying his power even over creation itself as her Lord. Yet, not only is this God over all the heavenly host and Lord over all creation, we find in 1 Samuel 1, he's even Lord over our lives. We're reminded of that in verse 6, when the author writes that this Lord had closed Hannah's womb. You see, even in the difficult things of life, God's hand is at work. Doesn't make it easier for us necessarily to know that. It's, if anything, might cause more of a mystery. It's one thing if I'm barren, it's another thing if this is because the Lord has closed my womb. How do we reconcile that? Why does God do what he does, and why does he allow what he allows? 1 Samuel doesn't necessarily answer that for us, but it does tell us this undisputed fact. He is Lord over all. And we cannot get the payoff here of 1 Samuel 1 without recognizing what it says about who God is. And so it is so clear in this passage. He is Lord over all. He's even Lord over time. He closed her womb in verse 6. Eli responds, "May the Lord grant you what you've asked of him." So if she's ever to get what she's been asking, it would be the Lord who would give it to her. Verse 19, and the Lord remembered her. And then, verse 20, only then, in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant. In the course of time. How long? In God's time. When the Lord decides. He's the Lord over all. He's the Lord over time. He's the Lord over our lives. What we're seeing in the story is how Hannah's life altogether is getting swept up into the story of God. The story that God is writing in his own narrative of redemption for his people. With Eli's words here, although they're simple, she receives a reminder and affirmation that the Lord sees her. The Lord's pulling over to take notice of her. Her life is under his care. Her story is getting swept up into his. I just want to pause and ask, how biblically do we think really about our lives? Do we think like that? Do you think like that about your life? When you got laid off? When you got dumped? When you got rejected from that offer, with that application? How biblically do we really think? When we are looking for the main character in the story of 1 Samuel 1, do we consider it might be the Lord and not Hannah? When we consider the story of our life, do we think the main character might be God and not me, who's the main mover and shaker and causal force? Now, so if this is true about who God is, it makes one thing for sure, that when God meets you, God doesn't do so to bring some sparkle to the story of your life, but to sweep you up, your life and breath and all that you are, into his story. So then, how should we respond to this God, the Lord Almighty? How should we respond to him? Hannah acknowledged God as the Lord Almighty and acknowledged herself before him as, quote, your servant. 3 times she says, your servant, referring to herself before the Lord. And she offered all that she had, dedicating even a son that she didn't have yet to the Lord. Now, she was not bargaining with God, and you shouldn't bargain with God either. It's a dangerous game to play. If you do this, God, then I promise I'll do that. He'll hold you to it, so you shouldn't even do it. That's what Jesus says. We know she wasn't bargaining with God, though, because there was nothing she was going to get in return from this arrangement. If God followed through and gave her a son, she was dedicating him over to the priesthood, to live actually a life as a Nazirite, which would essentially forfeit all the benefits she would have received having a son being raised in the household, to help around the house, to inherit the estate, to care for her in her old age. None of that would happen if her son were a priest. She'd maybe see him once a year the rest of her life. He wouldn't have an income to be able to share and to be able to endow to his own family. So, therefore, we know Hannah's not bargaining with God. She's getting nothing out of this. Something else has happened to her. In this time of prayer, in her greatest need, not even being met, she comes to the place where she recognizes God as God. And strangely, what happens is she's able to let go of all that she once held dear, even before she had it. Did you notice how she's turning from sorrow to peace, from tension to resolve, from fasting to eating again before she even receives what she's after? The issue here is not that we have needs that God needs to fill, but that we desperately need to know and be reminded that God is God. And yet, when we come to this place, knowing our sole true need is that God is God, we come to find out how all our needs are actually met in him. For he is the Lord God Almighty. Think back to Israel. They thought they needed a king to fight their battles like all the other nations did. But all along, they had what they needed. They had a Lord Almighty. They needed God to be God. And the Lord will see fit to give them a king, as we'll find out in 1 Samuel. But it would be the king he would appoint, not one that they would appoint for themselves. All along, they had such a king in him, in Yahweh, in the Lord, although they didn't either remember all that he had done or they had lost faith in his power and goodness toward them. God is not here to meet our needs. If you come here to church to have a need met, that's the news for today. Rather, God is here, and he's brought you here today to show you how all your needs are met in him. When we hide in him as our great king, and that's how all of this works, how we can go in peace before we've even received what we've come to ask for. This is a difficult story to tell because it makes me emotional, but a good friend of mine that came to faith, how he came to faith in the military, we were in the barracks together. We were actually roommates. He would see me reading my Christian books and Bible from time to time, and he would ask me questions and just try to get under my skin a little bit. And I would try to do the best I can. And it got just annoying. Got to a point and said, please stop and just read this book. I gave him The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul. Just read this book about the holiness of God. I don't know how many weeks went by, probably not a lot of time, and he gives me a call and he's like, you got to come to the barracks right now, man. I was like, what? So I go over to him, and he's like in tears. And he couldn't even get the words out. He's halfway through the book. Couldn't even get the words out to describe what is wrong with him. And I had read the book recently, so I think I thought I knew what was wrong with him. And I said, let me just try to guess. Let me try to, you can't talk. You're a blubbering mess. Let me try to say what I think you feel, and you can tell me yes or no. This is true, if I got it. Okay, so you're in reading The Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul, and you've finally gotten your eyes off yourself. You finally started gazing at the grandeur of God in his glory. You finally started to get your eyes off your perceived needs, about how you're the center of everything. And ironically, strangely, never expected, the weight of all the needs and problems of your life just started to be lifted off of you when you got your eyes off yourself and started to focus on God. And crying, he just nodded and said, yeah, it's exactly how I feel. What we need most is to be able to look beyond our perceived needs and to find how all our needs are met in God's own purpose for our life, not our purpose for our life. When our eyes are opened and we come to recognize God for who he is, we realize it is a much safer place to be. And it's a much more blessed place to be than when our wills are being accomplished in our lives, even when it seems difficult. And then when our will is being accomplished, his will seems so much more grand even than what our plans were for ourselves. This is how we can go in peace, even before we've received what we've asked for. We've come into God's presence and seen his glory. And now, in response, we want to give everything to him. Oh, if that's how you work, you can have it all. Surrender your life to his service. Get caught up in his wonderful work. And it's there we are finally free. This is why Hannah can go in peace. Why she can give her son over to the priesthood and forfeit all the benefits she would have had with a son at home. When God is not God, that is, when something in life has taken that place and has become a kind of God in our lives, then of course we must have it. Of course we're desperate for it and are emotionally enslaved by our need for it, and we'll claw tooth and nail until we can get it, cutting away at even important relationships in our own physical or emotional or mental health. So long as you or something else is God of your life, you can never have peace even if you get it. Let go and let God. Really corny, hate to say that, but it's basically the message of 1 Samuel 1. Let go, let God. And then you can go in peace. But it's not because your problems have been necessarily solved, but because you know that it's in someone else's hands, the Lord God Almighty. So here's the first way we can apply the message of 1 Samuel to our lives. Just repent of our pride and our self-sufficiency. Surrender our life to God as King. You may not be financially self-sufficient, but perhaps you're socially self-sufficient. You've got all the family and friends you care to have. Perhaps you've got your basic needs in life met in terms of a place to live and a job. And perhaps you think you're morally self-sufficient. I'm really a good person compared to other people. Why do I need to surrender my life to God? Because in light of his glory and greatness, none of that's actually true. We need to get low and humble ourselves before him. Do not stand in your self-sufficiency. It will enslave you. You'll never be satisfied. There's a reason Jesus said it's almost impossible for a wealthy person to enter the kingdom of God. Why? Because you're too self-sufficient. You're too distracted by your seeming self-sufficiency to realize that all that you have is from the Lord in the first place. It can be taken in a moment. You're also too self-sufficient to realize your desperate need for God's grace, whether you're rich or poor, whether you have a lot or you have a little. So the Apostle Peter says, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Now this is a big ask, to give your life and all that you are to God, even your own plans and desires and your own timing. So it takes some reassurance. And I know as a good public speaker, you got to give some reassurance if you're going to make a big ask like this. But we do find it in this passage. We'll conclude with this reassurance that we can do this. We can do this. We can humble ourselves before God. We can get low in the eyes of the world. We can even endure ridicule and laughter from others, the insensitivity of those who try to help, because this Lord Almighty delights to lift up the lowly. Could have easily ended the sermon and the passage with God is Lord Almighty, therefore recognize him as God, as who he really is. You'll finally be able to let go of those deep-rooted needs you feel completely controlling your life. But it doesn't end here. It goes on just for another minute to tell us that this Lord Almighty is the kind of God who remembers the lowly and he delights to lift them up. This is why we should get low, because we're that's his favorite. It's his favorite. There's been so many times, my wife wanted to do something nice for me for my birthday or for some event or something, and she came a little timid, with a plan, but not sure if I'd like it. And basically every time she's done that, I've said, of course I'd like to do that. Are you kidding me? That's my favorite. In our lowliness and humility, and we know where we fall short, we wonder, does God care to get involved with me? Does God care to lift up me and just take notice of me? And he's thinking, of course. You're my favorite. The humble are my favorite. The lowly are my favorite. This is who he is. This is what he does. He delights to work through the humble. He often works through the weak. One commentator writes that the Lord uses socially powerless individuals like Hannah, possessing profound faith in him, to overturn and transform the social order. And this will be the narrative unfolded in 1 Samuel that we will get through this fall. God worked through barren women all the time, Sarah giving Isaac to Sarah, who is the promised son of Abraham and would fulfill God's covenant to Abraham to make him into a great nation. And then Rebekah, barren Rebekah, gets Jacob, the father of the nation of Israel, named after him, who would be a light to the Gentiles, fulfilling God's promise to Abraham to bless all nations. Rachel, barren Rachel, receives Joseph, the greatest of Jacob's 12 sons, who would save the entire family line from starvation, giving them a home within the prosperity of Egypt as he ruled in second in command. Mary, young, not even yet married, Jesus is received from Mary. Now, who is Jesus? Despised and rejected by men, as the prophets would say. And yet Jesus would live, die, and rise again. He would send his Spirit. He would usher in a new creation for all his people and all creation. And he would have his people, the church, proclaim this message. And this message, mind you, remember, is what? Not wisdom in light in the ears of the world, but foolish. But this is how our God works. Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 1, God chooses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chooses the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chooses the lowly things of this world and despised things and things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. So get low, get humble. This is why we can, though. Why we can come to God with our despair and our humility, and also go in peace simply knowing he's heard us, because it's the Lord favors the humble. It was probably difficult to be named Hannah, which meant favored one. She felt the opposite, especially from Elkanah, despite all of his words. But now it comes full circle when the Lord remembers her. And she says, well, truly I am the favored one. Truly I see now the Lord favors me. Because it would be through this Hannah, this barren woman, that he would not only meet her needs of having a son, but through her son meet the need of the entire nation of Israel. As her son Samuel would become one of the greatest leaders Israel would ever know. Samuel would rise up as the final judge, the greatest judge of Israel, to lead the nation back to true faith and dependence on God. He would also become the kingmaker for Israel, eventually anointing King David, through whom the nation of Israel would receive an everlasting covenant with David's heir, Jesus, the coming and eternal king. Truly, true power is not found in one's position in society, but in one's posture before God. So let us cast all our cares on him, because he cares for us. Pour out your soul to God. Don't hold back. Nothing is too great for the Lord Almighty to handle, and nothing is too little for him to care about. He delights to work through the lowly. Consider these Psalms as we close in prayer. Psalm 16. I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad, my tongue rejoices. My body will also rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. Or Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. Conclusion, I shall not want. Let's take a moment now to pray. What is something the sermon made you think about that you need to pray about? Let's just take a quiet moment to give it over to God now in prayer before we come to the Lord's table.